from my perspective, and let me start off with that, for me, what gets me through the days at the moment is that I strongly believe that we're closer to the end of the tunnel than the beginning of the tunnel. And I think that's a critical point. When David asked me to spend 10 minutes with you today, I thought, I gave it a lot of thought of what I would like to share with you, and maybe some insights. And if most of you will have certain of those insights yourself, maybe you'll have a different opinion, and I really look forward to hearing the conversation afterwards, which also allows me to form my own opinion. So I think that's the important part. What I wanted to do is maybe start off with the developments in our source markets, because we've got a very strong line of sight in terms of our source markets, A, through our customers, B, of course, through industry representative bodies, and because of the global nature of Wiest, we most probably have a bit more insight into source markets than many other companies do. You might know that we have a joint venture with Der Touristik, which is operational in most of Europe, and because I sit on a board, I get certain information. I guess what was happening towards October, November last year is that there was an energy level in the tourism industry, particularly in Europe, that increasingly became positive about what they saw coming for 2021. And we saw energy levels where we suddenly started getting bookings again, where we were hopeful, and the numbers suggested that we would start trading latest in the second quarter of 2021. We are customers and tourism promotion agencies with creating project plans on how to trigger more travel from the second quarter 2021 onwards. And then, as we all know, the second wave hit us. And it was really interesting for me to see, and I think all of us, as for example, seeing the Lions Rugby Tour as one of the incubators of the restart of the tourism industry. And it was really interesting to see the psyche of our colleagues at Lions Rugby Travel in Ireland, and how their positivity in particularly October, November, and the first part of December. Unfortunately, that stopped immediately as the second wave hit Europe, lockdown started, closing of borders started again, and what was a whole heap of bookings turned into a whole heap of cancellations. And so all of us, I guess, in the DMC world ended up with a substantial amount of work process for nothing at the end of the day. What we see at the moment is source markets behave differently, particularly new source markets that very few of us have been involved in the past. One of which is, for example, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. So if I look at our bookings currently in East Africa and Zanzibar in particular, they are accelerating rapidly. And as a matter of fact, we have over 600 guests currently in Zanzibar, mainly out of Romania and Bulgaria, because those countries are taking less prohibitive steps in terms of the management, as the Prof was explaining earlier on. And as a result, the freedom of movement out of those countries is materially better. And then they're going to destinations. As you know, Tanzania is still in denial about the existence of COVID-19. They're going into destinations that seem to be either COVID-free or in denial, and as a result have no restrictive measures. I think where the most energy goes in our source markets at the moment is contracting 2022. So some of you will get a letter from us in the not too distant future pertaining to contracting 2022. And forgive us, because most of us are trying to survive 2021 at the moment. So I think a lot of you might think that we're smoking some special green stuff in the offices of Wiest or any other DMC. Truth of the matter is that all of us need to build a forward book, and certainly in our lives, the forward book normally is about 60 to 70% of annual turnover before the year even starts. Our forward book has evaporated down to less than 10% of the next 12 months. And what is very important for us as an industry is to build a forward book, because the forward book gives us some form of predictability. And it's only possible if we have the ability to put product into the market with a longer time frame. And hence, maybe the first piece of guidance that I want to give is, while it is counterintuitive at the moment to apply your minds to 2022, I would strongly recommend we do that as an industry and as businesses, because that allows us to build in predictability and the ability to build a forward book again as an industry. Maybe some info in the African continent, because we have operations in 7 countries on the continent. South Africa is the one that is impacted the most in terms of both current travel, which is virtually zero, as well as forward bookings. Namibia, because I guess of its low population density, is seen as a low-risk destination and is faring slightly better, not materially better, but slightly better. And East Africa currently, because of their seasonality patterns, and as you know, the wildebeest migration is July, August, September, is actually sitting at capacity for July, August, and September of this year, which is certainly not the case in Southern Africa. How much of that will cancel, how much of that will wash, is currently not predictable, but certainly camps, DMCs, transport infrastructures, and guides are currently fully booked for that period of time in East Africa. Which to me shows that there's a certain amount of pent-up demand. I don't think to the extent that it will save our industry overnight, and I don't believe that the pent-up demand will lead to a recovery of the industry post vaccines over a short period of time, and short for me is 12 months. I think it will still take materially longer, but I think it will recover quicker than we currently give it credit. Our industry is resilient normally and recovers quickly. I think this time it'll take longer. But many of my colleagues and our industry colleagues are currently of the view that it'll take 3 to 5 years. The latest McKinsey study, as a matter of fact, suggests that it will take 3 to 5 years to recover. My personal view is it'll go quicker. It won't take a year, but I don't think it'll take much more than 2 years to recover once freedom of movement is reestablished. On the supply chain topics, I think I've written endless amounts of essays and have had tons of interesting feedback, both personal as well as in the chat boxes, where we publish those topics. There's many an opinion that the value chain in the tourism industry is to the disadvantage of supply chain and of product owners, and I guess to the advantage of the channel, and mainly to the advantage of the channel overseas. And that at the end of the day, somehow or another, the money and the cash flows are unfairly divided, and I share that view. In principle, I understand the view, and in principle, I share that view. The challenge that all of us will have to deal with is that the Consumer Protection Acts are tightening up and not loosening up. And as a result of that, our wish list of more money earlier on hitting the destinations and the product to have, at the end of the day, the capital expenditure in creating the product. And the fairness would suggest that more money should at an earlier stage be there. The Consumer Protection Acts that throughout the world are currently tightened up to further protect the consumer stop exactly that. And I fear at some point in time we need to accept that reality and find ways of structuring our business interactions in a fashion that aligns ourselves to the CPAs, because I don't think they'll go away. And I think we need to face the realities in that respect and deal with them. I don't think that we can change global consumer protection acts. Next topic that I think might be interesting to this group of people is how we see seasonality developing. Now, looking at myself in the screen, I've gone gray dramatically, but at least I still have hair, David. If I cast my mind back to the beginning of my career in tourism in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s, is we had a brutal seasonality, specifically in Southern Africa. We had a very short season, mainly October, November, and mainly February, March. We had a small shoulder season and a very long off season. And the seasonality spread as a result of capacity being reached, and as a result, it's sort of squished out. The seasonality squishes out on the side, and the more volume you create and the more demand you have against the limited supply, the less the impact of seasonality becomes, plus some development of source markets that act in a counter-seasonal fashion, such as the United States. Our view, and my view, is that as a result of the reduced demand over the next, call it 2.5 years, we will run into an environment that is brutally seasonal again. I think we'll have a much shorter peak season. I think we'll have reduced shoulder seasons, and unfortunately, we will have prolonged off seasons from an international travel perspective. And that has a whole heap of consequences. For product, I think it has the consequence that we have to find, number one, more counter-seasonal source markets in terms of international travel. But I think my personal learning has also been to have virtually no exposure and distribution networks in the domestic markets has not proved to be a positive thing. The second thing, and that's more of a commercial nature, I think the importance is to understand in a business what are fixed costs and what are variable costs. And the more seasonal a business is, the more important it becomes that your cost base becomes more and more variable and less fixed. And that comes when that is both staffing as well as premises, IT, process costs, whatever the case might be. Our drive, TDM, and I would suggest that the same really applies to any business that is exposed to seasonality, is to get away from as many fixed costs as humanly possible and try and turn them into a variable cost that is volume dependent and not of a continuous nature. Interesting, I think, for all of us is working capital. It's interesting that the flood of predicted insolvencies in our industry have not happened. We see more and more at the moment, but in terms of overall size of the industry, I think the insolvencies for an industry that has effectively had zero trade for now close on 12 months is surprisingly low. And the reason is really working capital and how it evolves in the tourism industry as a whole. And during a shutdown period, or when you close your business down and you take your process cost out and you take a lot of your costs out, and you have some government support in terms of tours or whatever the case might be, working capital, your working capital position unwinds over time and actually allows you to survive for a prolonged period of time. The unfortunate truth is that during the restart phase of an industry, our industry is largely working capital intensive. So if I take our business in terms of inbound wholesale, the work process and the consequential cost of that work process incurs 6, 7, 8 months before the customer arrives, and as a consequence 7, 8, 9 months before the cash flows. So you end up investing in working capital at the moment, and your cash for that working capital will only come in half a year's time or longer. And I think it becomes extremely important to keep a very mindful eye on your working capital, because already European and particularly German and Swiss travel industry and the cruise ship industry has shown that the restart phase is when the insolvencies happen and not the shutdown phase. So I would strongly recommend to be absolutely on top of your working capital forecasts in order to be able to react to the shortfalls. And if one of the solutions was earlier prepayments or whatever the case might be, that is counteracted by consumer protection acts and the like, I suggest that that is not going to be a solution and it's not going to be workable. So there's my working capital views. And last but not least, relevance of different channels. I mean, we've had a decade of disintermediation driven by OTAs, OTOs, bed banks, etc., etc., etc. We have a view that the relevance of traditional distribution channels via overseas wholesale, retail, and inbound wholesale is a consequence of that. We believe that for a period of time, and one wonders how long people have a memory, but only hindsight will educate us on that view. But that the relevance of that channel will increase simply because the consumers are traumatized. Hundreds of thousands of people got stuck all over the world. Most people that did their bookings in a digital fashion didn't have a great experience when it came to repatriation, when it came to having somebody to talk to solve their problems when they're stuck somewhere, etc., etc. I think that trauma that the consumer had will drive the consumer back to a, let's call it analog channel, a human channel, and a channel where there is somebody to hold the hand if the proverbial shit hits the fan. And I think that will be around for a period of time. I don't say that disintermediation will disappear, albeit that I wish it would. But I say that there's going to be a certain level of re-intermediation into traditional channels for the next 2, 3, 4 years, however long human memory will last, and however more often there's going to be a level of stop and go in our industry. And I think the prof was describing the fact that it's likely that we'll have a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th wave, which really means that the industry will have stop, go, stop, go, stop, go for a period of time. And I think the relevance of traditional channels with humans that have the ability to communicate and manage drama is going to be substantially stronger. So here's our forecast for 2021, since this is the Happy New Year Zoom meeting. We think there's going to be virtually no international trading in the first 2 quarters of 2021. We think that there is going to be an increased booking activity from the 2nd quarter onwards for the 3rd, 4th quarter of 2021 and substantially for 2022, and hence contracting 2022 is becoming urgent. Despite the fact that all of us are in the here and now instead of the tomorrow. We think there's going to be a certain level of trade in the 2nd half of the year that will allow all of us to create some form of income and cash flow, but nowhere near what our businesses would have required in the past. And hence the cost reductions and the variable making a fixed cost, a variable cost is becoming critical. And I think we then from the 1st quarter of 2022 onwards will have a climb-out trajectory that will last the balance of 2022 and into 2023. And I guess that's our view on 2021.